Continental dollars were worthless. Wealthy business people might lose all of the money they had loaned to the government if the government could not pay back its debts. They knew that a federal government could raise enough money to pay them back, and wealthy business people wanted a federal government. But wealthy business people were not the only people who were affected by the economic problems that were happening in the United States. Falling prices for food meant farmers could not pay their debts. Farmers who had not joined the Continental Army had been very busy during the war. There had been a need for all the food those farmers could produce. During the war, many farmers borrowed money to buy more land, animals, seeds, and tools so they could grow more food to sell. Those farmers borrowed a lot of money, and by the end of the war, they owed a lot of money. Some of the food the farmers produced was sold to the Continental Army in exchange for paper money. But as you read, those Continental dollars became almost worthless. The farmers had debts, but they couldn't use the Continental dollars to pay for those debts. After the war, the situation became a lot worse for farmers. Many of the men who had been in the army were home on their own farms now, growing food to sell. Because there was more food for sale and less demand for food, the prices of most food crops fell. Meanwhile, the value of the Continental dollar the farmers had been paid became worth less and less. So in many states, debts could not be paid off with paper money such as the Continental dollars. For all those reasons, many farmers had great difficulty paying their debts. And remember, most people in the colonies at that time were farmers. Farmers in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, the state government raised taxes on farmers to try to pay for the war debts in their state. Because of the high taxes in Massachusetts and the falling prices for farm goods, farmers were unable to pay their taxes. The farmers borrowed money from banks and wealthy business people to pay for their taxes. When the economy did not approve, the farmers could neither pay back their taxes nor pay their debts to wealthy business people. The courts in Massachusetts began taking away the farms and selling them to banks and wealthy business people who had made the loans. The wealthy business people didn't get their money back. Instead, they got the farmers' land. Sometimes the courts even sentenced the farmers to jail for being unable to pay their debts. Well, as you could probably guess, this made the farmers very angry. Shays' Rebellion. In Springfield, Massachusetts, a farmer, Captain Daniel Shays, who had fought in the Revolutionary War, led 500 farmers in a protest against the courts in which farmers were being sentenced to jail. Those 500 farmers attempted to stop the courts from sentencing any more farmers to jail. The state's wealthy business people paid for a special militia to force Shays and his protesters away. Shays' men left, but 4 months later, Shays returned with 2,000 men. They took over the courts and attempted to get guns from the armory, the place where the army's guns were stored. The state militia dominated the farmers, but many people were alarmed. That event came to be known as Shays' Rebellion. The effects of Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts showed how angry the farmers were with the government. The wealthy business people feared that the farmers would revolt and weaken the country. Wealthy people felt responsible for doing what was best for the country, for example, keeping it strong so a foreign country would not attack. But the wealthy business people were also worried that the farmers would refuse to pay back the loans. Lots of money was owed to wealthy business people. If those loans were not repaid, the wealthy business people would lose a great deal of money. They wanted protection against an economic collapse that would weaken the country and cause them to lose all their money. Voluntary cooperation couldn't provide that protection because it couldn't solve the economic problems the country was having. Wealthy business people in Massachusetts also had a chance of losing all of the money they had loaned to the farmers if the next revolt of the farmers succeeded. Wealthy business people in other states feared a similar result might succeed in their state and cause them to lose lots of money. Wealthy business people knew that a federal government could prevent another revolt of the farmers from succeeding. So wealthy business people wanted a federal government that would help and help the country. Wealthy business people were willing to agree to a federal government that could enforce legally binding cooperation. They began to favor a federal government. Wealthy business people were ready to work for a federal government because they thought it could solve the country's economic problems and protect their property. So they started to move from stage 3, regular voluntary cooperation, to stage 4, legally binding cooperation. Okay, just to read through this slide. Wealthy business people were willing to agree to a federal government that could enforce legally binding cooperation. They began to favor a federal government. Wealthy business people were ready to work for a federal government because they thought it could solve the country's economic problems and protect their property. Time to change the plan of government. In February 1787, Congress decided to have a meeting of representatives to improve the Articles of Confederation. All the state legislatures except Rhode Island liked the idea. In May of 1787, representatives from 12 of the states came to Philadelphia for the meeting. The representatives knew, you know what, we're going to stop here. Let's just stop this.